Hello and welcome to another session of Voices of Healthcare Cloud. We're so excited that you are joining us today. We have a great session for you. My name is Shelly Avery and I am joined by my colleague Vasu. And we have a substitute today as Josh is out. We are going to be joined by Matt Anderson. We have an incredible guest speaker, and let's just go ahead and move on to the presentation. Today, this session is actually pre-recorded, so it's not live. So you're listening to a recording, but we created an awesome blog post with a lot of show notes and the things that are shown today. We really hope that you can grab those out of the blog. So thank you for watching. And so what is today's session about? We have this amazing speaker, Steve Adamo, who I have personally worked with about 5 years now, and he is the lead application architect at Texas Children's Hospital. And so you are in for a great treat. We're going to talk about how Texas Children's uses citizen development and low-code tools to provide quality of life improvements to the staff, coworkers, and frontline workers of their hospital. And so I'm really excited to introduce you to Steve. Steve, if you don't mind, give us a little background. Who are you, and how you got your current role at Texas Children's?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. My name is Steve Adamo. I'm married with 2 high school kids. As such, aside from work and my daily gym routine, I have absolutely zero free time for anything else in my life. But I wouldn't trade all of the late night study sessions and weekend soccer tournaments for anything. My role at Texas Children's, I joined TCH in 2010 as a SharePoint administrator. That role then expanded to encompass a few more Microsoft products. Those were the Skype and Project Server. Working in that area then led to my position most recently as a general Office 365 administrator in Teams, over Teams and SharePoint. And then I am currently serving in the capacity as an applications architect. And so while I still have a lot of administrative responsibilities in the Office 365 space, I spend the vast majority of my time working with the Power Platform.
Awesome. I know what you mean by like kids and late night. I have 2 of them myself, so
Absolutely.
It's well worth it for sure. So now you said you've transitioned into more of a Power Platform role. Is that
That's correct?
So how kind of did that happen? Like, how'd you go from SharePoint to Teams to Power Platform?
So it was sort of a combination of, I guess, what you'd call Microsoft Insight, right? Conversations with folks like you and Josh, as an example, and then my own curiosity, right? So, as part of my O365 administrator role and responsibilities, I would, daily monitor like the service health and message center in the admin center. And so at that time, which is, I guess, 3 years ago, nearly 3 years ago at this point, I was seeing, a number of messages in the message center about posts around Power Platform space. And so given my development background, before joining TCH, I had worked in several developer roles. I was naturally curious about this concept of a no code, low code offering. So I just took it upon myself, which I did when I first became a developer, to just sort of dive in head first, build a couple of applications just to see what was possible, but I was flying completely blind. And suffice to say, I was really impressed with what was available, and I knew that if I was able to just spend a little more time towards learning the fundamentals, I could, in theory, provide something meaningful, some meaningful quality of life improvements within IS and potentially org-wide. So after a couple of conversations with my leadership, they had allowed me to then, expand further into the Power Platform space.
That's awesome, Steve. Steve, can you comment on the first app that you ever made? Was that like a personal project, or was this driven by some need from the business?
So the first app that I built that was actually used in any production capacity was what we referred to as the Shift Manager application. And I know that caused a lot of grief with the folks at Microsoft when I was talking about at the time, because Shifts itself was sort of just coming to strides on the scene, but it wasn't, I guess we didn't have as much experience with it. So suffice to say, after COVID hit, Texas Children's implemented several measures to try to keep their workforce intact, basically. One was offering additional work shifts for those folks who needed those extra hours. So we looked at several potential solutions to help with the creation and management of those new shifts, including shifts, as I said, within teams. But in the end, TCH opted to use a custom application that we built in Power Apps, the application I built called Shift Manager. And so the tool allowed our leadership and the different areas within the hospital to create a series of these shifts based on date and location and role and some other pertinent criteria. And then for our end users to be able to submit requests for those available shifts. The leaders could then approve and or reject those submissions, and the end users could manage those shifts that were assigned to them and track and monitor those requests and show up at a certain date and time to get those requests accomplished. So it was very nerve-wracking being the first production level application, but it went really surprisingly well, and it was a very rewarding experience, to be honest.
That's awesome story, Steve. Very, deep clinical use case that you dove in with. I'm curious, what was your learning curve like? First production app, that too so complex. How did you ramp up on the Power Platform? What were some of the things that you read up or experimented with? Can you speak to your entire learning curve?
Yeah, so to Microsoft's credit, the learning curve is not as daunting as one might think. If you have any propensity for or interest in developing these sorts of things, it really does come quite naturally. So I would think anyone with experience just coming from even something like an Excel background where you're working with just sort of simple formulas, if you have any interest at all in expanding into this space, it is really very welcoming. So for me personally, I became more experienced, as I'm sure a lot of folks have done, by going the typical route. So I leveraged Microsoft resources and training tracks in my spare time, but I would say I got just as much experience from trial and error as I did from watching, I won't name names, but some certain folks on YouTube who were just experts in the Power Platform space. And so what I find really compelling about using the tools in this space is that you can pick up on a tidbit of knowledge watching a tutorial or a lesson and evolve it and shape it to work in your specific need, and then expand that and leverage that in 3, 4, 5 other applications down the road. So the little things you learn here inevitably expand and grow and become more powerful the more applications you develop. So it's just a natural progression.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for sharing. Shelly, do you want to go?
Yeah, so a follow-on to that app, because I was supporting Texas Children's at the time, and I remember, I don't know if I was involved specifically with that one, but I remember things were innovating very, very quickly, that March timeframe when everything was being shut down with COVID. So I'm curious, from beginning to end, how long did you have for that shift management app? Like, was it a day? Was it a week? Was it a month that it took to kind of get it ready?
So inevitably, I'm one of those guys who finds it hard to sleep when I have an idea in my head. So there was this concept of this application. So for me, the basic framework for this application was built within like 3 or 4 days. And as is the case with all the other applications, we always start small and expand from there. So we do sort of internal UAT, user acceptance testing, and then new quality of life improvements come out. And so we continually evolve the application. But to your question, the initial, and in most cases for virtually everything I build, I can get a framework in front of our customers in 2 to 3 days max. And that's pushing it. So.
That's amazing, Steve. Steve, I'm curious, what happened after you first demonstrated this app to your business stakeholders? Like, what type of curiosity and cultural shift did you observe in the groups around you, especially in your business stakeholders. Um, can you walk us through how that unfolded?
Yeah, so I don't think there was as much of a leadership impact with the this specific application. There was another application that we built, which was really our first. It was the first high value application at Texas Children's, right? It impacted the entire organization. And that would be an application that we refer to as the Connect clock. Our intranet is referred to as Connect. And when our existing timekeeping application went offline at the tail end of 2021, Texas Children's was looking for a temporary solution, right? Collectively, we were all looking into any and all options. So naturally, I thought of creating a Power App. I remember the initial prototype. Again, I developed it in about 2 days. And after a few demonstrations of the functionality that was currently working, we quickly pivoted to pushing the application into production. And so given the speed with which I could prototype the requests for new features, and we were doing our best to mimic the core capabilities of the previous application without actually trying to replicate it entirely, because the initial intent was this is going to be operational for maybe 2 weeks to get us through one single pay period, and then we'll go back to our previous solution. Unfortunately, it ran for closer to 5 months, 4.5, 5 months. We went through 4 pay periods with it. So after all this evolution, while this application was being used and we were updating it in real time, we were able to get a very feature-rich application developed, tested, made available to the entire org within, a matter of weeks. And so to your question, what did leadership think? I won't name any names, but I recall a very funny comment during. We would have daily briefings about this application and what we needed to do to make it, function, add new bits and pieces to it. And so in one of these daily stand-ups, we had one of our vice presidents on the call. And the specifics of the conversation she's referring to escape me, but as I recall, this vice president had been in another meeting discussing some potential expense or development time around a third-party piece of software that they were considering. Mm-hmm. And so I'm paraphrasing, of course, but I believe the comment was something along the lines of, she said, "Well, why are we unable to develop this in-house? If Steve was able to produce our timekeeping application in such short order, why can't we replicate something like that here? Why are we even discussing all these dollars and vendor hours and this, that, and the other?" So it was obviously a very flattering comment. But I just thought that was kind of funny.
Steve, I want maybe if you can, for our listeners and viewers, help paint the picture for the scale of this app. Like, how many users are we talking about here?
Absolutely. So for this timekeeping application, it impacted all of the Texas Children's employees who were non-exempt. And so that amounted to, I believe it was in excess of 20,000 users. Wow. And so we were monitoring its usage. So, and at the time, this wasn't built with a very robust backend. We didn't have SQL or Dataverse. This was driven purely by SharePoint lists, which speaks to the power of something as simple as having a SharePoint list as a backend. And it was growing at considerable levels, obviously, right? Because we had folks logging in upwards at least twice a day, to log in, log out, if not, do punch out for lunch and punch back in from lunch, sort of thing. So you could have 4 entries per day for 20,000 people. So it was heavily used, and we never once ran into a performance issue, which caused me a lot of sleepless nights, but we made it through it with flying colors.
Amazing, Steve. I have so many questions in my head, but I do want to let Shelly, ask away.
I guess the comment on that vice president leadership kind of, it seemed like there was like an aha moment there. Like, why look externally to spend money? Could we develop this in-house? After that, did anything change in the way IS is looking at developing internally with low code versus going through some sort of procurement and like how has that changed, if any, at Texas Children's?
Yeah, absolutely. So when this application was made public and folks were seeing what was capable in the Power Platform space, it absolutely had an impact on future projects. And so to that end, we approached Microsoft and said, how can we best, wrap our heads around this, because we knew this space was going to grow considerably over the next 6 months to several years. And so this first step, which we've just implemented, is the Center of Excellence, which gives us a view into the entire Power Platform space, from forms to flows to applications. We can see who out there in our environment is coming on board. We can reach out to them. We have automated processes to welcome them into the environment and give them resources to expand their skill sets. And on the flip side, we're also implementing in the near future an application, a Power App that's a Power Platform intake process, right? We're going to have our users be able to leverage an application to not only make requests, but they can track them in real time. Does this request require information security approval? It's sort of what stage are we in the application process, and they can leverage this application as a one-stop shop to not only make the request, but track where it is in the pipeline. And so, yeah, absolutely. Having launched this application that impacted the whole hospital absolutely changed our thought process when it comes to requests within IS or with anywhere else in the organization, right? So we're constantly getting new interest from the nursing folks, and all sorts of areas are now realizing what is possible and the potential, and it's very exciting times for sure.
Do you think that anyone from a leadership perspective or even yourself has considered the ROI on that, like versus using tools you already own versus, cost avoidance on third-party expenses?
I'm sure there are folks who are much smarter than me and the financial aspect who are running those numbers or have at least considered those numbers. I personally haven't been made privy to any of those conversations, but I would be surprised if those conversations aren't happening.
You should calculate those and get yourself a raise, Steve.
It's intriguing for sure, but yeah, I see your point, and absolutely there is an immeasurable ROI, right? So if those conversations are happening, I haven't made privy, but I'm sure they are taking place.
Awesome.
Steve, what's your most favorite or most interesting use case that you've gotten in this intake process?
So the intake process application hasn't rolled out yet. That's internal. But we've had some existing interesting requests come through. Like we were just working on. I was just working on a competency assessment tool, and I had never heard this phrase before. It's called 9-box, and I guess it's sort of it's hard. It's a series of questions that you pose to individuals, and depending on those responses, you gauge their ability to move up and be promoted. Like how promotable is someone based on their responses to this series of questions, and it's called 9-box, and I guess it's specific in the nursing area. And so I've built out an application called NLCAT, Nursing Leadership Competency Assessment Tool, right? Giant mouthful. And it's interesting because I had never, in all the applications I've built so far, and I've built quite a few at this point, I hadn't done as much just pure mathematics in the context of an application, right? And so the way each of the questions then tied to subsequent questions and had a running tally and had an overall impact and a score and a rating and all sorts of interesting things, I hadn't tied that many disparate systems together in one little package. And so that's been the most interesting and complex so far application I think that I've built, aside from our emergency hoteling system, which is an entirely different beast, but that's another story.
Can you just tell us a little bit about this emergency hoteling use?
Yeah, sure. So as many organizations do, we have an emergency preparedness wing of the hospital. And so when things like natural disasters occur, we have 3 different stages of folks that serve in different capacities. We have the prep crew, which prepares for an event. We have a ride out crew who rides out obviously during an event, and then the cleanup crew. In the past, historically, we've had events like Katrina, where we've had people who've had to stay at certain locations in the medical center for Texas Children's. And we've always had issues in the past of knowing who was where, right? Who's in this building? Where are they sleeping? When are they working? All sorts of things. So from a security perspective and from, all sorts of legal perspectives, we didn't have a good understanding of who was where, and we needed a solution. So this Power App I developed it's twofold. It's on the front end. There's a mobile application that lets the users log into a service. They can see an available list of rooms and showers, and they can book those of individual resources. I'm extremely oversimplifying the concept, but that's the basic idea. Is the mobile app lets the users very quickly see resources and request them. There's a full-blown administrative backend where we have our admin staff who can manage those reservations, adjust them as need be, blast out, send out alerts to the mobile apps. There's an emergency on the 5th floor of this building, please stay away, sort of a thing, and users get notifications on their apps. So tying those two applications together and making those as functional as they were, that was a very interesting challenge and extremely rewarding, because I learned a lot of things. When the best part of Power Platform, I think, for me, is how quickly I can pivot and evolve, right? We first launched this emergency app last year, or year prior, I believe, and it failed catastrophically. I hadn't accounted for, like, you can do all the testing you want internally, but until it's in real life in people's hands and you have significant amount of user acceptance testing, sky's the limit of what could happen. So it failed miserably, but like the phoenix from the ashes of that failure,
Nice.
I was able to pivot, and we created what I hope to be an exceptional app. Should we have to use it? I hope we never actually have to use it, but it was a fantastic learning experience.
So question, we're in conversations with other, hospital systems like yourself often, and trying to share, the value and the quick nature of being able to innovate and solve problems with the Power Platform. And one of the challenges that I get is our users don't want another app. Like, they already have so many apps. So how do you see the users, like this nurse app, the 9 boxes for, getting promotion, or this emergency app, or the timekeeping app? How are your users accessing them? Like, how are you making it easy for them to be able to get to the resources they need?
Yeah, absolutely. So the simplest thing we found is leveraging a QR code to launch an application, right? So in the context of that emergency management system application, the mobile application can be driven by a QR code. And so on the one side, it makes it extremely accessible. We literally print up flyers. You can post those at locations. You show up to ride out at this particular building. You just walk up with your phone, scan it. There's my app, reserve my room. I'm good to go. The only thing we have to take into account, and the hurdles we've had have, oddly enough, nothing to do with the Power Platform space. It's the accessibility to things, at least in particular Texas Children's. We, as with, I'm sure a lot of hospitals are, we have a very strict regimented security protocols. And so our mobile devices are far and away, or more often than not, fairly locked down. And so you have to enroll your device to have access to things like easy access to Office 365. So once you've gotten through those initial sort of access hurdles, and your users can access the Office 365 suite of tools, it becomes very accessible from accessing things like forms and applications by providing that QR code. And those are as easy to generate as, literally a single click. And you can print those up, put them on flyers and business cards and what have you. And it makes the initial access into that application very painless. But the other thing I would say is that a lot of interest in using an application is driven by the folks that request it, right? And by that, I mean, the Nursing Leadership Competency Assessment tool. They'll do things to drive their users to use the application. They'll incentivize using the application, right? So there's ways to get folks engaged. But just as far as ease of access, I think the simplest is making everything mobile friendly, which out of the box, we already have that at our fingertips. There's nothing that you really have to do from a Power Platform space to make it mobile accessible.
So I guess the main thing I got out of that, I love the QR code, by the way. I'm stealing that. I'm going to share it with others. Great idea. But I think the big thing I heard was, when the business or the end user community has a need and you provide a solution to their need, they're going to access it.
Absolutely.
If we're not just creating apps to create apps and we're like, you need to use these 15 apps because I told you to. It's like, no, we're creating a solution for you specifically for your need, then they're going to use it. I think that's what I heard, because I think a lot of folks that we're talking to, they're like, well, why should we create these apps? It's like, well, when your business has a need, then you create the app. You don't just create apps to create apps.
Yeah. So having just looked in our environment, I think we have something of like, we're approaching the 1,000 mark for a number of apps in the environment, which just is absolutely insane to me.
Yeah.
But far and away, at least everything that I've developed, and I've got 200 or 300 under my belt alone, it's like, I don't think that I've built a single app that wasn't something that was a quality of life improvement. It wasn't building an app for the sake of building the app. It was, we see a need, something that could be, an Excel spreadsheet that's been emailed around for the last 10 years just because, right? So we might develop some sort of process to help optimize that. But far and away, what we develop is as a response to a customer need, customers coming to us and saying, hey, this is a serious pain point. Is there anything we can do to alleviate that pain? We build that app, and that's exactly what they want to use, right? So
this phenomenal volume of apps, Steve. Amazing, like 200-300 apps. That's just probably puts you right up there in the list of topmost app contributors all over.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, as a pioneer, as an OG in the space at your organization, how has your role evolved as a mentor, right? I'm sure other people have also approached you wanting to learn about your journey and how they can ramp up as a citizen developer. What's been your role like, and how has that type of a conversation unfolded? If you can share.
yeah, absolutely. So with my change in role to becoming an applications architect, that was actually, I guess, an understood idea that I would spend a decent amount of my time doing peer review. So I've had colleagues on my team reach out, so I guess taking a step back, we have at our fingertips, thankfully, our Microsoft Pod resources. And so we have weekly syncs with, in this case, our Power Platform folks, and they can resolve 99% of our issues. But if it's sort of an off the cuff comment, or hey, I'm working in this app and something's not working, or I just want to bounce this idea off you, like what am I missing? I've found it extremely rewarding to work with my colleagues and help work through those issues. And so inevitably, what will happen is we'll be in a session, we'll screen share, and I'll be looking at some code and reviewing something and say, oh, well, you could potentially try rewriting it like XYZ as opposed to in this manner. And so more often than not, we'll resolve the problem, and happily enough, often in ways that I hadn't initially thought of when the problem was first proposed to me. So as I've probably said already a few times, in the Power Platform space, it seems like there are a dozen different ways to potentially approach a problem, and it's so versatile that you're sort of never without a solution if you can just wrap your brain around the problem and digest it in small, manageable chunks. So being able to do those peer reviews with my colleagues has been extremely rewarding, and I think we both learn, during those sessions. It's been great.
Gotcha. I have a very sort of a weird question, but I'll ask it anyways. What's your favorite design component off the shelf? What type of your personal style do you like to add in your apps?
So I have an HTML background. As a developer, I was HTML, and then I went into ASP.NET. And so when I was an HTML developer, that I won't say the phrase I was going to say, that extreme OCD about pixel perfect alignment of elements, that's what I carry forward into my apps. So I don't develop an app. I don't use out of the box colors or buttons or anything. Every single element in any app I develop has been looked at the minute pixel level and placed exactly where I want it. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question correctly, but for me, my design methodology is I develop I approach it this way. If customers are coming to us and they're saying, hey, we have this need, we want to have something that improves our quality of life, odds are they're going to be staring at it for a fair few amount of hours every day. So I'd like to give them at least something that's somewhat easy on the eyes, easy to look at, navigable, usable, right? So there's a lot to be said. There's a whole concept of UI development, how it pertains to, ease of use. So for what it's worth, that's my approach.
Love your
So
answer.
if you bring an app to Steve, it's gonna look good, is what I heard.
Well, it might not do exactly what you want, but it's at least going to start off
Yeah.
looking good. Then we'll get the functionality there, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So what's a good, exciting new feature coming out in Power Platform, Steve, that you wanna, incorporate in your everyday experience?
Funny you should ask. So we just launched. Are you all familiar with Epic in the healthcare system?
Yes.
So
Yes.
Epic Change Control is big. It's probably the biggest system we have at Texas Children's, and they get tens of thousands of requests. It's an unbelievable amount of volume that goes through those folks, and they had been living on SharePoint lists and sort of antiquated forms for a number of years, and they were running into performance issues. So, long story short, I built a new application for them, a Power App for them. And they've been using it we launched it about 3 months ago, and they've been using it, really enjoying it. And they came back very recently with a nice long laundry list of, quality of life tweaks and improvements. One of those being they wanted to basically be able to click on a link and jump directly to a particular request within the application. So to answer your question, something I'm very interested in using, which is relatively new to me, is deep linking in the Power Platform space, right? I haven't leveraged that yet, but it's going to fit in perfectly with this request. It's going to let those users, by virtue of clicking on a single link in an email or wherever the case may be, jump 2 or 3 levels deep into an application, right to those details they want, as opposed to having to go through the front page and eventually get there. So I'm excited to add that functionality.
Very exciting. And these are deep links to the EMR directly?
Yes.
How fascinating. That's amazing. That's a space that Shelly and I are very curious about.
Yeah.
I don't know, Shelly, if you had a follow-up question.
Well, my colleague Matt, who is kind of sitting here in the background on the call, has built applications in the space with deep linking. So really exciting to hear that, Steve. And, everybody, or the target audience for this is all health and life sciences. So I assume everyone will know what Epic is. And if other people that aren't in healthcare are just watching from a Power Platform perspective, well, they can look it up, but most everybody understands, that EMR space and the challenges that come with it, because it's a mammoth of a program. You have to work with it. There's constraints. And so I think it's super cool that you have at least started, helping the team that supports Epic, do their work better and more efficiently. So that's really awesome.
Steve, I have a couple of high-level questions, if you don't mind, maybe sharing your point of view. What's your vision for sort of a low-code platform helping with an organization's digital transformation journey overall? Like, how do you see this evolving in the next, 6 months to a year to 5 years? How do you see low-code citizen development as a culture coming, into the mainstream?
Yeah, if I had my druthers, I mean, ideally, I could see 6 months to a year, and I've dropped very subtle hints to my leadership saying, there's no reason why, when inevitably this takes off more, that we don't have a branch within IS that's dedicated to the Power Platform space, right? There's obviously enough of a demand for it, and so where do I see this going ideally in the next 6 months to a year? I see myself and potentially some of my colleagues having that branch, which becomes a dedicated resource to the hospital to pursue these options. So I know that ideally Microsoft paints the Power Platform space as that citizen developer, empowering the users to build for themselves. But I think there's a lot to be said for saying resources that are here to help jumpstart that interest, help jumpstart that process, and can be called upon should things potentially go awry, right? So not necessarily building applications for you, but giving you that 101, giving you that initial training, getting you out of the starting blocks, and then being there should you get, you advance to the next stage, you become that black belt and you need, bounce ideas off. So that's where I would like to see us go as we grow in this space at the hospital.
I love that because I feel like there really are two versions of a citizen developer. Maybe you and I represent each of those. Like, I feel like I am a no code citizen developer. Like, I can understand the business problem, I can understand the framework, but when you got to get like deep into those extensive code modules because you want this button to do this super fancy thing, it's like, let me call Steve. You could be
Right.
like that helpline. So I totally get that. And what a great way to be able to empower those kind of traditional business users who want to elevate and learn, but don't have kind of that developer background like you have. And I think having that kind of happy marriage between the folks who know their problem really, really well, but the technical folks to like support them and help them and do it the right way.
Well, there's a twofold benefit to it, right? So case in point, I had a colleague reach out from an environment department. I had never spoken to her before. She reached out. She had heard my name, I guess, in the various Power Platform circles. And she said, I have this idea, this form I want to develop and tied to a flow. We're going to seek these approvals. And can I bounce this idea off of you? Yeah, absolutely. So it's having someone as a resource, it makes it a little less daunting to get started. You know that you can call upon someone should you need that assistance, and yet you still want to have that ownership of it. You still want to have that sense of accomplishment. I built this thing that's helping our organization. That's very rewarding. So I think it's benefit on both sides. So I think it's great.
Awesome.
That's amazing. Steve, if time, money, and resourcing were not a problem, what's a use case you'd like to attack? What's like a problem that you have sitting out there on the shelf that you want to approach and get cracking at, but just don't find the time? I'm just curious.
So we have this intake process, which I'm building now. But if there's one thing that we've always struggled with over the years, and we've tried a couple of different iterations of solutions, it's our application catalog, right? So all the applications for IS and general supports, and there's unbelievably, there's thousands of them, right? From the minute bomb and pop little one-off applications to giant monstrous applications. And we've had different tools that help us sort of track, well, who's the service owner, who's someone to contact, what's the urgency, priority, all the sorts of different things you need to know when an application goes down or whatever the case may be. We've never had a really good source of truth for that information. And so if time and money were no object, I would love to build a solution that helped us, just manage that mammoth beast, right? Have a good understanding of all of the applications in our environment, and just wrap our heads around a little bit better than what we have currently.
Good point. Thanks, Steve.
Absolutely.
So, Steve, I know we had discussed maybe you showing something, but we've been having such a great conversation. I have just, I guess, a couple kind of closing questions for you.
Sure.
So I guess if someone has been considering building an app and they're nervous or don't know where to get started, any advice you would give on kind of how to get started and just kind of any encouragement to someone who might be feeling a little bit daunted or overwhelmed by taking the plunge?
Yeah, I think the simplest thing to do, it's a tired phrase. I'm sure people say it all the time. It's just jump in feet first, right? So Microsoft is not shy about providing resources. And so you can start with what I would consider a simpler approach, right? One of the simplest things you can do, the simplest sort of full cycle application you could build or full cycle concept you could build is start with a form. Forms are very simple to build. And then you can tie a response to a form to a flow. So someone submits a form response, a flow is going to trigger, which will then send an email, right? So 3 very simple concepts that you can tie together. And on the Microsoft site for all of the various services for forms and flows and Power Apps, they make the templates and tutorials and services front and center. So there's really no excuse for not having access to options. So I would say just don't be intimidated by the breadth of what's available. Just just give yourself a very small objective, start small, expand from there. It really is a rewarding experience, and the learning curve is not nearly as daunting as one might initially think.
Well, awesome, Steve. We're so encouraged by everything that you've had to say and excited that you were able to share it with us today. And we did want to just let the audience know that Steve is referencing a lot of different resources. And so if you're listening to this recording, it's most likely from our blog post. So check out the blog post for a bunch of URLs for kind of those getting started resources, and reach out to your Microsoft account team. If you need assistance, as Steve has mentioned, he's used his account team, and he has referenced a pod. We'll also kind of explain what some of those are. So Steve, Vasu, Matt, thank you so much for your time today. And we're excited that hopefully this brings value to the healthcare community. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for watching today's session. As always, you can go to the blog space, aka.ms/Voices of Healthcare Cloud, to see all of these great resources and check out our sessions that have happened in the past. We also have another 2 great sessions coming up, one in September talking about delivering modern member experience, and then in October really around health team collaboration. So I really hope you come back and check out these sessions in the future. Thanks so much for watching, and talk to you again next time.